Hi, I'm Lee, and welcome to my sewing room. I recently finished dress number 124 from the February 2022 issue of Berta Style magazine. The neckline treatment on this dress can cause a little bit of a problem if you're not careful. I remember doing something similar years and years ago when I was a beginner, and the results were a disaster. But I've learned a lot since then. And since sharing is caring, I want to share with you what I've learned so you don't make the same mistakes that I made. The neckline is not your typical rounded neckline. It has a slit which is formed by the center seam in the bodice and the front neck facing. This means there are 4 pieces, 2 seams, and 2 points that have to come together neatly and smoothly at one single point. And that can be a little tricky. Because of that center seam on the front and the facing, you cannot just pivot at the bottom of the slit. The front pieces and the facing pieces look like this. The marks indicate the end of the slit opening, and it is important to mark these points accurately. Choose your favorite marking method, but be sure to make the marks big and visible. And be sure both pieces are marked. Mark the facing pieces the same way, big and visible. The facing pieces are interfaced, so be sure your marks are on the interfacing. The next step is to sew the fronts and backs together at the shoulder. Here's the facing, and here's the bodice. Now it's time to sew the bodice fronts together at the center front. When sewing the center front seam, be very careful to sew up to, but not past, the marking, and backstitch to secure the seam. Do the same with the facing pieces. Your goal is to start or stop right on the mark. Finger press the seam allowances open on both the facing and the bodice. Carefully line up the seams and the points. Move the seam allowances out of the way and make sure the marks on the facing and the bodice are aligned. When everything is aligned, pin the facing to the neckline. Making sure the seam allowances are moved to one side and out of the way, sink the needle into the marked point and begin sewing the facing to the neckline. Starting exactly at the marked point is very important. Backstitch and continue sewing around the neckline. When you've sewn all the way around the neckline, move the seam allowances to one side so you can see the ending point. Again, make sure all of the seam allowances are out of the way. Stop exactly at the marked point and backstitch. The stitching lines should appear to be continuous. If this were a real garment, I might rip out these stitches and try again, but you can sometimes do damage when you're ripping out. Next, clip the curves in the seam allowances. I like to clip the seam allowances separately and stagger the clips so there is no show-through when I press the neckline. Turn the facing to the inside and you'll find a nice-looking smooth slit. Now you can understitch the seam allowances to the facing. I like to use my edge stitch foot for this step. Using the edge stitching foot produces a uniform line of understitching close to the seam. Take a look at the inside and see how nicely the seams line up. The neckline looks good because both your marking and your sewing were accurate. In this neckline treatment, starting and stopping on the marked points is critical. I didn't know that when I was a beginner, and my carelessness showed up in the garment. By paying careful attention to the markings for starting and stopping points, I was able to get a dress I'll be proud to wear. Thanks for watching.